It's a Thought Police free zone. The Liberty Lineup radio show, where independent thought just can't be bought.
I'm an American.
Welcome to the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup with Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore with defendingutah.org. This is the Naked Truth segment where we think right and wrong, not right and left.
We gotta stay strong, 'cause everything's on the line. We gotta rise up, we gotta stay strong, to save our way of life. I believe in faith.
We'd like to thank our show sponsor, EOS Mobile, the only self-service that supports conservative causes. Go to EOSCELL.com for more information and mention the Liberty Lineup radio show. Did you know that you can listen to the show from anywhere online through k-talk.com? You can access our calendar and join our chat room. You can also like our Facebook page at K-Talk Utah and post photos at Instagram at K-Talk Radio and tweet our handle at KTKK. And best of all, download the K-Talk app through iTunes or Google Play. Last month alone, K-Talk was heard in 82 countries. Help us spread liberty around the globe.
So on the show we have Sheriff Richard Mack. Sheriff Richard Mack, if you're not if you're one of the few people that aren't aware of him, been following for a while. I remember back in 2000, I had read your book about gun confiscation, and it talked about what was it?
The Brady Bill?
The Brady Bill, yeah, and the one you had about, For My Dead Cold Hands.
For My Cold Dead Fingers.
For My Cold Dead Fingers, yes. It's been, like I said, it's been a while, but I remember just, even back then I was reading that. And
yeah.
really
Dead Cold, Cold Dead still works.
Yeah.
And now he's the founder of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Yeah. And you can check out his website at cspoa.org. Sheriff Mack, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you.
Oh, that's all right. Thanks for having me.
And we've been wanting to talk about what's going on up in Oregon. There's been a lot of back and forth between different sides saying what's going on, and you've been kind of at the forefront of this. I remember you've got your lawsuit against the Clinton administration that you won, where they wanted to force you to enforce federal gun laws, and you beat them at that.
Yeah.
And so, what's going on? What's the real deal? Is the media telling us the truth about what's going on up in Oregon?
Well, asking if the media tells the truth is quite an oxymoron in the very question. But some of the media has been really decent, and I have to tell you that Lou Dobbs from Fox Business Network really Monday night did the best story I've seen nationwide on it. It was just a fantastic story. And the reason why I loved it so much is because he espoused the same philosophies that we promote at the Constitutional Sheriffs. And anybody can see that at cspoa.org. But he told about the problem, and he had two lawyer analysts talking about the entire situation involving the Hammond family. And that's what's really important here is the plight that these people have suffered being victimized by our own federal government and the criminal corruption of the federal government in going after them the way they did, and 2 times for the exact same charge. How the federal government gets away with that is just absolutely flabbergasting and astonishing and unimaginable.
Totally unconstitutional. So
what does the local sheriff have to say about that?
I'll say that again.
What's the local sheriff have to say about that in his area?
He hasn't said enough, and he hasn't done enough, and he knows the problem, but he thinks the federal government has the right to do what they do. And I'm astonished at sheriffs in the country who believe that they have to sit back and let the federal government victimize citizens in their counties.
Has this sheriff had a chance to go to any of your conferences that you've had?
No, he hasn't. He hasn't been in very long, but He hasn't, and I don't think he's taken the time to read our books and to read some of the books that I've written recently about the power and authority and responsibilities of sheriffs to stop this. And my most recent one just came out a year ago called Are You a David? And it talks a lot about these issues that we're talking about. In fact, it talks a lot about the Bundys. But I think the main thing we have to understand here is the exact charge that was leveled against the Hammond family. The federal government commits that same act on a regular basis all over the country.
Right.
And they did it in my county. And I just talked today to a sheriff from Utah, and I have discussed the same problem with sheriffs in Texas, and I have discussed this with a sheriff in Florida. And I had this personally happen in my county when I was sheriff, and it's happened since in my county just recently, within the last 2 or 3 years. And what they do is the BLM and the Forest Service do controlled burns, exactly what the Hammonds were doing on their ranch. To get rid of foliage, it actually helps prevent forest fires,
Right.
and it also helps prevent shrubbery and trees growing that take over the land and make it impossible for cows to graze. And so in order to keep your ranch and your land viable and livable, you have to do these controlled burns. Well, it's happened to the federal government. It happened in my county. And when the federal government was burning some shrubbery at the bottom of the mountain, the winds picked up, and you never know when that's going to happen, sometimes in the desert of Arizona, and it burns half the side of Mount Graham, where people have cabins and people come to enjoy recreation, and scouts go to play, and people go hiking and camping and fishing and hunting. They burn the place down, the federal government. Now let me tell you something. In any of these cases that have happened dozens and dozens of times within just the last few years all over the country, not once were any of these federal agents charged with arson, just like the Hammonds were. And arson has to be intentional.
But didn't they get an additional charge of terrorism?
Of course not. Yeah, I was getting into that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Sorry.
believe me, I'm not leaving that part out. and so none of them were charged with a terrorist act. And now I'm calling on every sheriff in this country to make sure that federal agents responsible for those types of fires in your counties, that you bring them up on charges, and that you make sure that they are either charged federally or locally, and you make sure that they receive the same exact punishment as did the Hammonds. Now, I really admire the Hammonds. As you mentioned, I was there, but I was there only to do a peaceful protest on behalf of the Hammond family. And what wonderful people. And it really brought a tear to my eyes to see that our country could be so low and so corrupt as to send these good, law-abiding Americans to prison.
That's crazy.
They're humble, they're strong, they're submissive, they're meek, and they're courageous. And I honor them for that. And when we went to their home and we looked down the hill while we were walking up the street, some of us were up at the front, and I said, man, look back at that. That's a wonderful picture. And we're kind of up at the hill going up from downtown next to the Safeway up to the Hammond home. And you look down, and about 2.5 blocks, there's just hundreds and hundreds of people from on both sides of the road, filling the entire road for 2.5 blocks, waving flags and signs and posters and singing. And then when we got to the Hammond home, we laid flowers on their doorstep and in their yard. And they had tears in their eyes, and they thanked us all for the support. They were very touched. It was a very warm and touching moment, even though it was absolutely freezing. It was like 2 degrees. I'm not exaggerating. It was 2 degrees. And it was a very warm feeling in associating with these great people. And then we busted out, and you know how the media really paints us all as radicals and extremists and all these nuts and rednecks and gun-toting knuckle grabbers, you know, and it was really touching. And to prove everybody that we're so radical, we busted out singing "Amazing Grace." I kid you not. The whole
Just-
crowd together just started singing Amazing Grace.
That's pretty terroristic, don't you think?
Oh, I know. And so then, when we finished that, Mr. Hammond, Dwight Hammond, waved to us all and he said, I just want all of you to know, this is not about me. This is about our country. And now that is exactly what I believe that it is. And this is why I understand the frustration of Ammon and his brothers and some of those that are inside the compound there at the Federal Wildlife Reserve, because it's just been too frustrating for people to keep saying, we're going to keep watching law-abiding Americans go to federal prisons when there's absolutely no reason for it. And that the federal government tried to buy their land, and the Hammonds refused to sell their land to them. And so then they really went after them and charged them with domestic terrorism.
So that's the
And-
motivation for the whole thing, is that they wouldn't sell their land. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct.
So how did they How did they move from arson to terrorism?
Well, you can add that on top of it, but
So
they
they're
had
saying that they had terroristic intentions.
Yeah, you see, and you have to prove that. And the thing of it is, they've never had a trial on that particular charge. They contested it. He says, "Oh, well, we have to file under that, and so we already had a trial, and you were found guilty, so we're going to add this to it." And that's completely and entirely unlawful. And they appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit is the most liberal, pro-government, overturned court in America. And I don't trust the courts anyway. I don't trust the federal courts or any other courts, and I don't trust the federal government. And why would anybody?
Right.
And so the Hammonds got victimized. They got completely railroaded through, and they tried to get it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it. But yeah, the Supreme Court will sure hear about Obamacare and gay rights and gay marriage and all these things, but they won't hear a case to put the federal government back in its place when they're victimizing some citizens like this. And the Supreme Court let it stand that these people go to prison.
Twice.
And
The
so,
same
yeah.
time.
So where do we turn?
Right.
Seriously, where do the people in this country turn for peace, safety, and liberty when government is so out of control and corrupt?
I think that's a point that people need to, on the pro-government side, people are saying that we've got to be a nation of laws. We got to go by the rule of law. Well, that's
Why
what these
doesn't
people
the
are
federal
going by.
government
I
do it
agree.
then?
The Constitution is the rule of law, and the
It
federal
is.
government's violating that.
So yeah,
Right.
why don't they demand that the federal government set the example?
Right.
And instead, when DEA agents and Secret Service agents go down to Latin America and hire prostitutes, and that they have a serious, this happened, this was on the front page of USA Today.
Oh yeah.
They were talking about, I still have the paper, I have it right here in my briefcase. And I always look at the front page of the USA Today when I'm traveling. Sure enough, front page, DEA agents, that's us, that's United States federal agents, are down in Colombia, and while they're there working, they have a sex party. And you know who provided the prostitutes? The Colombia cartels.
Wonderful.
The very agencies these people are supposed to be fighting and arresting provided the prostitutes for DEA agents who are supposed to be combating the cartels. And you know how many of those agents were fired? None. Do you know how many of them were tried? None. Do you know how many of them were charged? None. But we go after a guy for domestic terrorism because he burns down some of his juniper trees and it spilled over onto some public lands. It was an accident. He did his best to clean it up, and he paid for it. And then after they pay for it and already served their sentences, then the government comes back and goes, "Oh, we want a do-over. We want you to go to prison for 5 years."
Has that second sentence gone to appeal?
Yeah, that's what went to the
That's what went to the Supreme Court. And so there's literally no other recourse that they have.
except what Lou Dobbs said and what I have said. And this is this. Lou Dobbs actually, and I can't believe, maybe when I was on Lou Dobbs and he remembered me talking about the constitutional sheriffs, maybe that's where he got educated. Because I was on his show a little over a year ago, and we were talking about these very issues and what we're all about at the CSPOA and Constitutional Sheriff Movement. And so, lo and behold, he actually said, I don't really blame the federal government on this, but I do blame every elected official in Oregon and in that area where the Hammonds were arrested.
Yeah.
Why didn't they stop it? Why didn't the U.S. senators and the congressmen from Oregon stop this? Why didn't local officials, governors and state legislatures and sheriffs and county commissioners and county attorneys, why didn't they do anything to protect these innocent people from being victimized by our King George III federal government? And I'm telling you, it was beautiful. It was one of the greatest stories I've ever seen on television. It was an amazing story. He called it right, and he really challenged the elected officials of Oregon to fix this. And that's where it can be fixed.
So what is the local sheriff saying, not about the protest at the federal facility, the illegal federal facility? What's the sheriff saying about the Hammonds?
Well, he doesn't say awfully much. I asked him point blank. Sunday I talked to him on the phone, and I said, come on, you don't think these people should go to prison, do you? And he kind of hesitated, started talking something about it, and then he goes, well, wait a minute. No, he said, I want to answer your question. No, I don't. And he says, we've been working on getting them an early compassionate release.
Oh, that's so kind of them.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. And so here again, we're asking permission of criminals to be more user-friendly, you know? And so we're begging at the trough of the federal government as if they have authority to do this in the first place.
Right.
Tell them no. You know, seriously, I told him, I said, look, why don't you just arrest the Hammond yourself on some local charges and keep them in your custody until the federal government, just tell them, these people are under my custody and you're to leave them alone, and we have some charges pending, and when our charges are done, then you can come and get them. Until then, stay away. And then he could just release them on work release and leave the charges pending,
right,
indefinitely. And so he didn't want to do that, you know, even though that was really creative and be kind of fun. He refused to do that. But he, you know, the real bold step that we suggest is stand there at the Hammond's home and just tell them they're not going anywhere, and I want you to leave my county. And if they try to do something, just tell them, you're not arresting anybody in my county unless you go through me.
Right. And
these people are not going with you. And then he should also have the backing of the county attorney and the county commissioners. And I think that's all it would take. And then the rest of the sheriffs in Oregon need to stand with that sheriff, and they need to start doing this. And these things are going to keep happening, and this is part of the frustration that people in this country have. And now the Bundys went there with some other militia members and other citizens because they've had it with all of this kind of crap and this unconstitutional, illegal victimization of law-abiding American citizens.
So what's going on with that situation? Are these two separate situations?
Yeah, they are. They are. Even though they say that they're doing it on behalf of the Hammonds, it's still completely separate because, one, the Hammonds didn't want them to do this.
Okay.
And the Hammonds have disavowed it. Now, let me make something really clear here. This is a very touchy situation and a very fine line that I am having to walk. And I'll tell you why. It's a very difficult line, and it's a very fine line, because I will never back down from my friendship and admiration of Ammon Bundy.
Right.
He is a good man. He used to live right here in our area, and I actually teach at a charter school here in Arizona, just outside Phoenix, where Ammon Bundy and his children lived, and his children went to that school last year. They have since moved, and I was really looking forward to my association with that family and their children at the school, but he moved a little over 7 or 8 months ago, and he moved to Idaho. And I was disappointed because I really have met those children. They're wonderful. His wife is wonderful, and Ammon is a wonderful man. And we have a very close relationship, and we're very good friends. And I'll tell you flat out, I love Ammon Bundy. And anybody that calls him crazy or a nut is a liar, because he's not. And he's not violent, and he's never hurt anybody in his life. and he hopes that he doesn't hurt anybody. And he is not a nut, and he's not crazy. And I totally respect his sincerity in doing what he's doing. I don't agree with it. It is not something that I would suggest that he do. I tried to talk him out of it, and he will tell you that I did try to talk him out of it. I believe that that's why he didn't tell me he was doing it until after he did it, because he knew I wouldn't agree, and he knew I would try to talk him out of it. And so anyway, I just want it perfectly well understood that this is a good man, whether you agree with him or not. You have to understand the frustration that he has gone through, and many others that are in there and across this country, because nobody in this country will do anything to stop a ruthless tyrant government that we have today. And it's out of control, and so many people have been victimized by this ruthless government, this Gestapo government that we have today, and the communism and socialism that are being forced and shoved down our throats. People are sick and tired of having to bow down to Washington, D.C., and Ammon sincerely prayed about this, and he's sincere about hoping to accomplish something with this. And I disagree that it will help. I don't think it will help, and I think it'll make matters worse. And I don't want to see him go to prison, and I don't want to see him or anybody else hurt. And those two things are looking very imminent at this point.
So what based on what principles are you not in favor of what he's doing?
Well, plain and simply, I think that what he is doing is going to cause more problems for us all, because this is going to embolden the federal government, not put them back.
Right.
There is no way they can allow these people to win.
So that's a good break. We're off to a break, so we're going to just stop our conversation for a second with Sheriff Richard Mack and talking about what's going on with the situation in Oregon. Special thanks to our show sponsor, EOS Mobile. Cell phone service for supports the conservative causes. Go to eoscell.com. Mention the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore. We'll be right back with more Sheriff Mack.
It's a Thought Police free zone. The Liberty Lineup Radio Show, where independent thought just can't be bought.
Welcome to the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup with Ben McClintock
Enoch Moore
of DefendingUtah.org. This is the Naked Truth segment where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Today we've been playing our pre-recorded interview with Sheriff Richard Mack. We're discussing what's going on up in Oregon. We'd like to,
We gotta stay strong, 'cause everything's on the line. We gotta rise up, we gotta stay strong, to save our way of life. I believe in faith that frees.
we'd like to thank our show sponsor, EOS Mobile, the only cell phone service that supports conservative candidates and causes. Go to eoscell.com for more information and mention the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. Did you know that you can listen to this show from anywhere online through k-talk.com? You can listen to all of the show archives. If you missed earlier parts of the show, we'll have it on our website, and you can listen to past shows. You can also access our calendar and join our chat room. You can also like our Facebook page at K-Talk Utah and post photos to Instagram at K-Talk Radio and tweet our handle at KTKK. And best of all, download the K-Talk app through iTunes or Google Play so you can listen to the show anytime. Last month alone, K-Talk was heard in 82 countries. Help us spread liberty around the globe. So like I said, we've been playing our interview that we did late last night with Sheriff Richard Mack discussing the situation. There's actually two situations there in Oregon, one with Ammon Bundy and one with the Hammonds.
and they are separate.
And
They're
then
separate situations.
And we need to understand that, because what's really the federal government is clearly out of control and lawless, and that's I don't think that case can be made any more clearer than through what's going on with the Hammonds. Being charged with terrorism for burning a fire break is just out of control.
For protecting their own land.
And then the double jeopardy of going to jail and getting out and then saying, oh, sorry, we meant to send you to jail longer than that, so you got to go back. I mean, that's lawless. And right before the break, Sheriff Mack was talking about how basically that the federal government couldn't let Ammon Bundy's situation stand. And we've got a caller that has a comment about that. Jared, you are on the air. What's up?
Certainly the media is discouraging people from thinking this has any possible outcome, which is good. But if everybody showed up, I don't think the FBI is going to massacre a couple hundred unarmed people while the world is watching. We, the people, own that $10 million BLM birdhouse. People are starting to leave the mental reservation here. They're starting to think for themselves. You said the government is out of control. I say they're in control. They're in control of everything. And I've been trying for 12 years to do everything the right way. Knock doors, call, email, run for office, delegates, county, state. You'll never do anything virtuous in the Republican Party. Stop thinking that you ever will. You have to live by the principles of Mosiah 29 and be involved in the process of self-rule.
Definitely, yeah. You're being involved in the process, and that's beyond, like you said, just writing letters and making phone calls. And I think that's an interesting perspective that, yeah, if that many people came out, that just kind of like down in Bundy, you're not going to have the federal government's not going to just start mowing people down. That's for sure.
And people
and
are
if they
doing
did,
that.
that would be wild. I mean, that would...
There's a handful of California people that just showed up, and they come and go.
And they what?
They're coming and going. I mean, they're not
gotcha.
They're not necessarily armed, but they're there.
Right. And that's the thing, too, is we need to understand that a lot of, even though Sheriff Mack might not be at 100% on board with the method of what Ammon Bundy did, we have to understand that the media is lying. You're being lied to about the story, straight out from the media. That is a fact. And whether you agree with the exact details of what Ammon is doing, you cannot deny that you're being lied to, that this wasn't an armed takeover of a federal building. It's vacant. It's a bird sanctuary, and it's a public building, and nobody's being prevented from going there, and nobody was hurt to have the Ammon Bundy and the people that are going there to support him. Nobody was hurt with that. So just as you look at this, whether you agree with them or not, you need to understand that you're being lied to and not fall for the lies. I appreciate your call, Jared. Thanks for calling in. Call back anytime.
Yep.
So we want to continue on with the go ahead.
With the interview.
With the interview with Sheriff Mack, and have him give a little more explanation of what he's talking about with that. What could actually happen with the federal government? Why won't they let us? The same thing happened here that they happened in with the Bundys down in Nevada.
It can allow these people to win. If they win, you shut down the federal government. You shut down the bureaucracies that are controlling our land and our lives. They can't let that happen. You stop having the federal government as we know it today. They're not going to stop that. And a much more powerful approach would be simply what we've been preaching. And I'll be the first one to admit that we haven't been successful enough. We've had some great success with sheriffs standing up to the federal government and some state officials. But it has to be bigger, better, and faster. And I'm afraid that the sheriffs are now going to pull back from that because they're going to say, I don't want to be involved in this kind of stuff.
That's an interesting thing that he brings up there is giving that bad taste in people's mouths. And we don't want to be worried about what other people think when we're doing the right thing, but I think that's an interesting thing to bring up. And we've got Steve on the line. He wanted to talk about a possible victory. Steve, thanks for calling in. You're on the air.
How you guys doing today?
Thanks.
Hey, on this situation up there, Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers, they're pretty sure they've identified a guy that's in there with Ammon, who is agent provocateur. And my feeling on this is when they hit the federal building, they're going to hit the Hammonds too, because that's just going to be a side story that's just going to be glossed over. And I don't think they're going to go in their guns blazing on the Hammonds property, but that if they take the property, which is double indemnity, that double hitting them on the jail sentence is just so that they can bankrupt them, steal their land.
Right.
I totally believe that they've got their two best case scenarios working, which is they can get the land that they wanted in the first place, and at the same time just drive a stake through the Patriot movement. I believe, like your last caller said, people should show up there by the thousands unarmed, but most people only listen to the 15-second soundbite on MSN and think that these are a bunch of yahoos up there, which I kind of talk first before you do what you did, you know. But
Right.
I totally believe that this is a smoke screen, so when they do come in with force, they can get the Hammond Ranch, you know, at the same time, and that's going to be probably something that, you know, you never hear about again on the mainstream media. That's
No.
all I got.
That's
By the way,
plausible.
Sheriff Mack, thanks for everything you've ever done for this country. It's people like you, Joe Pyle, Ron Paul, that actually give me hope that eventually maybe we can turn this thing around one day.
Definitely. We can turn this around. Thanks for calling, Steve.
You bet, thanks.
Appreciate it. I think your perspective is definitely plausible. I really hope you're wrong. I mean, not because it's not likely, just that would be awful and really sad if that's the case. But let's go back to our conversation with Sheriff Mack.
But the plain and simple fact is, Lou Dobbs is right when he called for local officials to stop this. And if somebody had done something for the Hammonds, this wouldn't have happened, and the Bundys would not have done this.
Right.
Again, though, the Hammonds do not want this, and they did not want this. And so it's kind of hard to say, we're going to do something for you whether you like it or not.
Right.
And that's kind of what Ammon did.
So
And-
how is this different than the situation down at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada?
Oh, well, I was there, yes, and it's quite different. First of all, this was their land and their area where they lived, and the Bundys owned that ranch, and they had been trying to fight it in legally for 20 years. And the same case went to court in Nevada, in federal court in Nevada, on a Wayne Hague family, H-A-G-E. And he fought the federal government for 35 years. In fact, he fought them so long, his first wife died, his second wife died, and then he died, and then his children continued to fight to keep their ranch. And the federal judge, Judge Jones, actually claimed, and I have this in my book, Are You a David? I have the case in there, and what the judge said is the federal government committed criminal conspiracy and fraud and about 10 other felonies against the Wayne Hague family. And when they came to get the cattle and confiscate his cattle, the sheriff there, Sheriff Tony DeMeo, who recently retired, refused to allow them to take the cattle. Just the opposite of what the sheriff did in Clark County, Sheriff Gillespie, the coward that he was. And so that is the biggest difference right there. In Nye County, Nevada, the sheriff acted and defended the Hague family, and in Clark County, a few years later, he did not. The sheriff failed to do his job. So Tony DeMeo was one of our CSPOA sheriffs. He was on our board. He was a great man, and he wouldn't allow this to happen in his county. And this is the example that we want to set for all the other sheriffs in this country. But the thing that you have to remember, too, is the Bundys were on their own property, not somebody else's. They didn't take over any federal building. They were simply defending themselves against the destruction of their home and business and ranch.
So
And
why
so
would
that's
the federal
the-
government allow what happened to the Bundy Ranch to let stand, but not allow what's going on in Oregon to let stand? What's the
Well,
difference there?
it is different because they actually occupied a federal facility in Burns, but this is the reason. When the chips were down and it was the most intense situation, life and death situation, and you could cut the intensity with a knife, when the protesters went to the makeshift corral where the federal government had kidnapped all the cattle and had about 500 cattle in this makeshift corral, the protesters were going to go free the cattle at the Bundy Ranch April 12, 2014. And The federal government had about 200 snipers and paid hitmen, and literally paid hitmen, who were former mercenaries in the military. And the order to kill the protesters actually was given, and that's documented. They did. I even had one of our officers who was on the scene there call me, and I was on the freeway on I-15 outside of Vegas trying to get there, but traffic had been backed up so much I couldn't get in. And then I followed some emergency vehicles when they had their lights and siren going on. I went off the side of the road and followed them, which I could have been arrested for that. But anyway, I made it in, but I didn't make it in time to be there at this intense moment. But I talked to reporters and others who did and saw some of the footage.
And this is an intense story, and we're going to have to...
We're going to a break.
Cut.
So we don't want to cut them off in the middle of that. But so what's the difference between the Bundy situation down in Nevada and what's going on in Oregon? This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore. After the break, we'll be right back with Sheriff Richard Mack discussing the situation in Oregon. This is Ben McClintock with
Enoch Moore.
And we are back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com, with the Liberty Lineup Naked Truth segment, sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. And we were just playing our recorded interview with Sheriff Mack talking about the situation up in Oregon. And
the stories that he's telling us is absolutely incredible. They're absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And firsthand experience. And I asked him, what's the difference between what's going on up in Oregon and what between that and what happened down in at the Bundy Ranch down in Nevada? And he discussed, well, one of the main differences is one was private property and one's is the government building. And then he gets into what really kind of went down at the Bundy Ranch to prevent everybody from just being mowed over by the federal government.
How close were we to the next shot heard around the world?
Yeah.
Right.
And so we'll go ahead and just rewind a little bit so you can kind of get more about what he's saying. And but we're going to get back to our interview with Sheriff Richard Mack.
The federal government had about 200 snipers and paid hitmen, and literally paid hitmen, who were former mercenaries in the military. And the order to kill the protesters actually was given, and that's documented. They did. I even had one of our officers who was on the scene there call me, and I was on the freeway on I-15 outside of Vegas trying to get there, but traffic had been backed up so much I couldn't get in. And then I followed some emergency vehicles when they had their lights and siren going on. I went off the side of the road and followed them, which I could have been arrested for that. But anyway, I made it in. But I didn't make it in time to be there at this intense moment. But I talked to reporters and others who did and saw some of the footage. And so the government got on the bullhorn and said, turn around or we will shoot you. You will be killed. And my officer called me and says, Sheriff, they're going to listen. If you'll do me the favor telling my wife that I love her. And I know his wife, and I intended to do that. And I really busted my butt to get down there to try to prevent that. When I got there, it was all over, and I found out what happened. And what happened was some of the sheriff's office from Clark County had responded. And right when they looked like they were going to get killed, this deputy sheriff, I think he was a captain or major, he did have some brass, and he was kind of a ranking officer, but he was the only one. Sheriff Gillespie was still hiding at this time. And this deputy, Tom Roberts, rushed out in between and put himself in between the protesters and the federal government, the BLM snipers and the paid hitmen. And he stood there and he told the federal government to stand down, and all the federal officers, he said, stand down, don't shoot. And he could have been shot himself. And then he turned to the protesters and he said, what do you want me to do? And the protesters, in fact, Ammon Bundy himself said, you're the first real authority we've recognized here. You tell us what you want us to do. And he said, I want you to back up. And all the protesters did what they were told by this deputy. And they backed up about 10 steps. And then that deputy turned to the BLM and federal government snipers and mercenaries. And he said, you need to leave. This is done. This is over. And you don't want to be on film shooting a bunch of innocent people, and it's going to go all over the world, and your families are going to see it. And he says, this is over. Leave. And you know what? They left. Because one man stood up and did the right thing. And again, everybody should read that in my book, Are You a David?
Wow.
It was astonishing. It was amazing. And I'm telling you, if it hadn't been for a deputy doing the right thing, people would have been killed that day.
Wow. So with the case up there in Oregon, with the Hammonds, do you feel that they're not wanting to have the support on their land and to have them defend them against the feds because they're afraid? Or do you really feel that they're standing on a principle? What's going on in their minds, do you think, on this?
My opinion on that, I can't talk for the Hammonds. In fact, they really don't like people talking for them.
I can only imagine why.
But in my estimation, they just didn't want anybody getting hurt. And they didn't want the violence. They said that over and over. They didn't want any violence. And, people offered to come and stand at their home and guard their home and them armed. And they didn't want that. And why? I can't tell you why, but my opinion is the way they were so meek and courageous that they just didn't want anybody getting hurt. They didn't want another Waco on their property or on their conscience.
Do you think the situation with Ammon Bundy will make the government come down harder on the Hammonds?
No, I don't think they can now, even though I would have said that too about the first one. But it might diminish the possibility of getting them out on early compassionate release because of Dwight being so old that, sentencing him to 5 years is almost, maybe the rest of his life.
Right, a life sentence.
But his son is only like 46 or 47, I think, and that's Stephen. And so why would they give him a compassionate release?
Right.
So not all of it makes sense. What they need is simply to be released. They need to file a writ of habeas corpus, and they need to have somebody in the state of Oregon get behind that. And I shouted out for Lou Dobbs, and I will also criticize Ted Cruz because he was being interviewed yesterday by Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck asked him about the siege at the Wildlife Reserve, and Ted Cruz was very critical of them and said this is not what you do, and we don't do this in America. But he does nothing to get the Hammonds out.
Right.
And so that kind of lazy-ass politician, to me, is not worthy of our support.
Right. Yeah, he should be calling out the federal government on their double jeopardy.
Totally. He could fix it.
Right.
And he's a United States senator, and he's just more concerned about getting more votes instead of doing the right thing. Even if it cost him the election, he should be fighting to get the Hammonds out of jail.
Kind of setting these two issues separate and making it more about the Hammonds again and how the federal government is violating the Constitution and the law in sending them back to prison.
Right. Exactly. So it's a very tough situation. There is absolutely no question that the government has been criminal and corrupt in this entire matter, and that we would trust them in any way to do the right thing and get the Hammonds out, and then treat the Bundys correctly and properly. Probably is not going to happen. They don't have a track record that supports that. It's amazing that if you're in the federal government and you commit all sorts of crimes, nothing ever going to happen to you. In fact, when the federal judge said the federal government, BLM and Forest Service had committed crimes, one of the guys I even remember out of my book, his name was Tom Seeley, And so if he wants to sue me for saying this, tell him to go right ahead. But the federal judge actually said the head of the BLM and the Forest Service in this case against the Wayne Hague family, he called them out. He said he referred them to the Justice Department for prosecution. And guess what happened? Nothing. And this was a federal judge telling them that they were held in contempt, that they committed fraud and conspiracy and racketeering. And you know who usually gets charged with racketeering? The mafia. And kind of funny if you draw any similarities between the federal government and the mafia. Oh.
So in a case like the Hammonds, they've decided not to. So you've got a situation, and I agree with, of working with the local sheriffs to get them to do their constitutional duty.
But how do you get the local sheriff there? Well, what are the chances, like you said, with the Bundys in Nevada, someone from the sheriff's office came down, you said one person did the right thing, right?
Yes.
So how do we get one person to do the right thing? Is there a chance of one person with the right authority to do the right thing in Oregon?
Well, if you ask me, I think the sheriff is going to do everything he can to hide from the entire matter out there. I would suggest to him that he go arrest or try to arrest them, because if you'll recall, during the Bundy situation at Bunker Hill, Nevada, a year and a half ago, Cliven Bundy said on national television that if the sheriff came to arrest us, we would go with him. But we don't recognize the federal government authority to do that. So I think the sheriff should give it a try and try to arrest everybody inside the Wildlife Reserve building. That would be worth a try. I do not believe they would shoot him. Maybe he's too afraid to take that chance, but I would be willing to go with him. And let's make this a state charge. Or if he would say, he could call Ammon right now, and so could I, and say, hey, Mr. Bundy, I have a warrant for your arrest and everybody therein, and I'm coming to get you. Be ready, because I'm coming, and Sheriff Mack's coming with me. I would go do that. And I think I'm more than 50-50 believing that they would leave, because everybody in that building believes that the sheriff is the authority, whether you like it or not.
Right.
And so I don't believe that the Bundys would go against what they have said nationally, that they respect the authority and power of the sheriff, and if he wants to come get them, he will.
But with the Hammond case, if you're in a different county, because the Hammonds have decided to submit to the federal government. But
Yep.
if this same situation were happening somewhere else, and the family had done every recourse to have the actual law of the land enforced, and they had the government's back turned on them every step of the way, what would be, even the local sheriff said, nope, we're going to let the feds throw you in jail for terrorism, for burning a field on your property and adjacent to your property for a good purpose, but we're going to throw you in prison for terrorism, and nobody's there to support them. What's the recourse, do you see?
Yeah, you see, that's the whole thing. That's why it's so frustrating, because there is no recourse. They don't have any place else to go, and so that's why the only place you have to go at that point is the same one for everybody all across the country. When you've exhausted everything and you have no place else to go, and you don't have any more money, you don't have any more lawyers, and the federal government has an endless supply of all of that, where do you turn? And if you can't turn to the sheriff and local officials who swore an oath in God's name to uphold and defend the Constitution and thus protect your God-given rights, and you're going to allow, can you believe that sheriffs would actually say this to their constituents and to the community? I will protect you from the rapists and the drug dealers and the street gangs and from burglars and murderers, but I will not protect you from any government committing a crime against you. If they ever go back, if they ever go after you, if they ever try to swindle you or steal your property or victimize you in any way, then you're on your own. I hope you can get a good lawyer. How can the chief law enforcement officer of your county say such a thing? I'll protect you from those criminals, but I won't protect you from these other criminals.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense.
They're choosing which criminals to enforce, to prosecute.
Well, yeah, and Thomas Paine said the same thing when he wrote The American Crisis. He said, it really doesn't make any difference to me whether, and I'm paraphrasing because he used some bigger words and kind of some terminology that was more appropriate to that age, but he said it really makes a little difference to me if it's a highwayman, and that of course that's a street robber or robber. Right. If a highwayman comes into my home and steals everything and kills us and loots, or if the government does. It really makes very little difference. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. And I think it's astonishing that we've come full circle, that we have exactly the King George III government that we started a Revolutionary War to stop.
Right. So in that case, then you would agree that if, like the Bundys, if the Hammonds had asked for the Bundys to help protect them, that would be a legitimate case.
Yeah, it would. It would. And quite honestly, I think I probably would have gone to the Hammonds and stood there too.
Right.
And protected them. They deserve that protection. They're innocent people. And somebody somewhere has to do more than what we've been doing. And I would have announced, I will go and do it because your sheriff refuses to do so.
Right.
I would have announced that. So that's not a lawless thing to do.
That's the thing you need to help people understand, is that it's the federal government that's lawless. They're the ones ignoring the law.
Correct. And I'm not gonna apologize for defending innocent people against a ruthless tyrant. I'm not going to apologize for that.
Yeah.
I do not agree with the way Ammon has done this, but I do honor him as a wonderful human being and a good friend.
And understand where he's coming from, whether we might go about it or not.
Totally. Yeah.
So is he stuck in a situation where his pride's involved, where he can't say, crud, I goofed up? Let me back out of this?
You know, I don't think so. I think he's humble enough to say he made a mistake, but he really believes that he had an answer to prayer on this, and he assured me that he is supposed to be there and that he doesn't fully understand it either. And this is one of the most humble men I've ever met. I don't believe his pride is running what he's doing.
Okay.
I believe he believes he's doing the right thing. He knows that he's in a very dangerous and precarious situation. He knows that. He's not dumb. He's a very intelligent and dedicated man. He loves America, he loves the Lord, and he loves his family. And so he knows what this is, and he knows how I feel about it. Believe me, though, if you want me to say whose side I'm on, the federal government or Ammon Bundy, I'm going to pick Ammon Bundy.
Right. That's not a very hard decision to make when you're putting it between those two choices, I don't think. And it's, as we are headed to a break, we're going to finish off our interview with Sheriff Richard Mack after the break, talking about the Bundy and Ammon situation in Oregon, and that they are two different situations, and that the federal government is being lawless. And when they're accusing the people in Oregon of being lawless, it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black. And we need to really understand and recognize that and what's really going on, and that the Hammonds really are being abused here by the federal government. This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore, and we are on K-Talk Radio AM 630, and we'll be right back with the rest of our interview with Sheriff Richard Mack. The Naked Truth is sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. Welcome back to the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup. This is Ben McClintock with my co-host,
Enoch Moore.
We are from defendingutah.org, and the Naked Truth segment and the Liberty Lineup is sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. And we've been talking with Sheriff Richard Mack about the situation up in Oregon. The situations, I should say.
Plural.
It's a bad idea to mix the two together because these are separate issues, and that's something that Sheriff Mack's really been really done well of pointing out. And so let's get back to his interview real quick. Let's finish it up. We just got a couple more minutes left of it.
And then after we finish up the interview, we can talk about it some more and take some calls.
Take your calls at 801-254-5855.
Well, you did say someone has to be doing more than what we've been doing.
Yes, we do. Yes. But this isn't the strategy I would have used, and I've actually shared with Ammon what I thought that should be, but I'm not willing to share that with you. Sorry.
No problem.
But the federal government already might have our conversation on tape anyway, so maybe they already know.
The
but
NSA's after you. So,
yeah.
What should our listeners do? I know you're not going to encourage them to, over the air at least, violate the law.
No, I do want them to do something. First, I want them to join. I want them to join the CSPOA at cspoa.org. I want you to be part of this movement that's peaceful and effective in getting sheriffs to get off their butts and get moving and defend people. That's what we've been doing the last 5 years, 6 years now. And my wife and I have dedicated our lives to that movement. And there's a lot of good sheriffs in this country that have done some things to defend people against the federal government. And every time, I might add, that they do, the federal government has backed down. Every time, without fail, every single time. Except there's one other case, Phil Lyman's case in Utah, the county commissioner who got arrested. But that's because the federal government lied to the sheriff and told him they weren't going to arrest him. And so the sheriff backed off, and then they sneaked in and arrested him. But I talked to
other collusion involved in that as well.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of people there in Utah that are likewise very frustrated and pissed off at the federal government because of the shenanigans they pulled in arresting Phil Lyman. And Phil Lyman is a very good man also.
Right.
And he has to serve 10 days and then probation and a $100,000 fine. And from what I understand, a lot of people got together to raise $100,000 for him to pay that ridiculous fine.
Great.
And so, yeah, that's what we need. That's what we need.
Is that why he's not fighting it more? Is because it's just I'll serve a week and a half in jail and we raise them, so we're good.
That's correct. And he wants out, and I believe he'll be back to fight again. But the federal government pulled so many shenanigans, and I just talked to a sheriff about it today. Not his sheriff, but a neighboring sheriff in that county. And man, those sheriffs are ticked off, and they are livid with the shenanigans and corruption of the federal government, the Justice Department, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are livid with those liars and corrupt criminals that pulled the shenanigan on Phil Lyman. So what we need to do is we need the people of this country to call the sheriff in Oregon, leave a message, whatever you can do. Call the U.S. senators and congressmen from that area. Call the governor's office. Get these people doing something and get them to work to get the Hammonds out. And I tell you what, whoever gets them out and works to get them out, they're going to build a national monument to that person.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. Well,
so
thank you so much, Sheriff Mack. Appreciate you joining us today on
Thanks, Sheriff.
Liberty
You're
Lineup,
welcome.
or the Naked Truth segment. This is Ben McClintock with Enoch Moore. We're from defendingutah.org. And appreciate you. Again, our listeners, hope you'll go to cspoa.org.
We really appreciated having Sheriff Matt come on and talk about that. And this has really sparked a lot of people to want to call in. And we've got some callers that we'd like to talk to. They got some questions. Kevin, you're on the air. What's up?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. The LDS Church has condemned Ammon Bundy's behavior. Number one, does this bother you? And number two, does this bother you because the LDS Church has a member named Harry Reid who votes for abortions, funding Planned Parenthood, and the LDS Church is still involved in scouting, which has become very liberal. So what's your take on all this as it pertains to the LDS Church?
This issue is actually, we admit, it's something that's been troubling to a lot of members of the church. And it's something that, if you look at the statement itself, I think it's important to look at. It said based on reports.
So based on the media reports, right? That's what the condemnation is based upon.
And so, since the media reports are completely false, that's one key part of it. And then also separating the two issues of the Hammonds and Bundy. And so
it's not condemning the Hammond situation.
Correct.
It's just talking about the Bundy situation.
And as far as Harry Reid goes, he's actually that situation is really pretty hairy. As if I don't want to be no pun intended, he's actually come out at BYU and said that past church leaders have led the church astray, and so I think it would be in line for some people to start condemning Harry Reid. But
Absolutely.
So Kevin, I appreciate the call. Call back anytime. We've got Robert Wentz on the line. Robert, I appreciate you calling.
Yes.
What's up?
Am I on the air?
You are on the air, Robert.
Okay. I just have a comment that you guys keep talking about them taking over the building.
Right.
They didn't forcefully take over the building.
Thank you.
They have not denied anyone entry to the building.
Right.
So why don't you just say they're occupying the building instead of saying that they're taking it over? They've taken it over. They're not controlling the building. That's a public building, and they're inside of it. So what?
Definitely. I agree. I apologize if we said it the wrong way. In the beginning of the show, we tried to make that distinction. I agree with you, Robert, 100%. You're right. And I apologize if we did that, if we stated that incorrectly throughout the show. It's an important distinction to make.
Okay, and I also have a question.
Yes.
Why has not an attempt been made to negotiate?
That's a good question.
Why doesn't the Ammons ask for a negotiator, someone with authority that they can discuss this with?
And that person with authority would be the local sheriff, correct?
Well, not necessarily. It could be a reporter.
Okay.
Anyone that can actually talk to them and find out what their demands are. What can they do to defuse this?
Gotcha. Right. Yeah, it
And
seems
that
like
needs to be made known before anything happens.
Doesn't it seem like the federal government's trying to escalate this as much as possible?
I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
So every effort should be made right now to de-escalate it.
Absolutely.
Get it into a negotiation phase before somebody gets hurt.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's my suggestion, and I wish there was something I could do, but I'm sure over here in Spanish Fork, Utah.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you calling in, and I'd suggest that, yeah, we work on that, and I appreciate you calling. Call back anytime, Robert. But, yeah, the government's clearly not trying to do anything but escalate the situation. And on line 4, we've got Carl. Carl, you're on the air.
Yeah, thanks. I found that the best source of information is the trial record of U.S. versus Dwight and Stephen Hammond. Therein, there were 3 witnesses, a hunter, the hunter's father, the hunter's guide, who actually saw the Hammonds kill 7 deer on federal land and then set fire to that land in order to cover up their crime. And also the teenage relative of the Hammonds testified that he was ordered by Steve Hammond to set the fires and then to be quiet about it. The fires spread so rapidly the kid had to jump into a creek to save his life. So this is the basis of the charges against the Hammonds, and they were found guilty of malicious damaging of U.S. property by the use of arson.
Okay, we got your point, Carl. Okay, so the arson. So they were found guilty of that. But what about the Constitution and double jeopardy? And what about adding charges after the conviction of terrorism? Is that really what Congress meant when they passed the anti-terrorism laws, do you think? Carl?
The court, the trial records indicate they were never charged with terrorism. They had made a plea agreement with the U.S. attorney of 5 years, and eventually the U.S. attorney forced, because of U.S. laws requiring a mandatory sentence for such a crime, that they spent 5 years in prison, and that's why they gave themselves up and are now in jail. I mean, the facts are there. Richard Mack is lying about.
I don't know if there was ever any evidence provided of the poaching. I'm not sure if I.
Well, that's what
saw
they were
that anyway.
convicted of in the case, and so the government thought that they were made that was clear. But either way, you can't charge somebody with terrorism, and to call Richard Mack a liar, that's not what the facts are. The facts are that the government put these people in jail, let them out, and are saying, "Oh wait, we need do-overs." So that's thanks for calling, Carl. But we need to make sure that that's not. We know what the real facts are on the case. Martin, thanks for calling. What's up, Martin? You're on the air.
Yeah, I wasn't able to hear that on my phone, that part, but I can't find anywhere where the Hammonds were convicted of poaching.
I don't. Yeah, that'd be a good thing for Carl to bring up, because I don't know if that's the case or not specifically either. I haven't read the full case.
They were convicted of, lighting the fire.
Right.
Right. It was just lighting the fire, and from my understanding was that was some liberal spin that showed up.
Yeah, they weren't convicted of poaching, and also Carl thinks that the Constitution says that you can sell green land, that the federal government can sell green land, but you can't sell brown land. He meant that earlier. So I just want to say Carl has no. I think he's a little crazy. But okay, thank you much.
Well, that's a clear point that we want to bring up again that we brought up. Thank you, Martin, for calling. Call back anytime. Is that that the federal government calling that their land in the first place is lawless. It's not their land. They're not authorized to have that land. The BLM is illegal. Its existence is lawless.
There is no enumerated power for the BLM.
It's illegal. And so if we want to be a part of the rule of law, we have to recognize that the BLM is illegal, it's lawless, and the fact that the federal government has that land, that's lawless.
We'll come to the end of the show here.
To throw up the to say that the Hammonds should be put in jail twice after the federal government or the judge made this mistake is ridiculous, and that's criminal. And thank you for listening to the Liberty Lineup today, and make sure and listen tomorrow to the Hollywood Y Guy on the Liberty Lineup every Friday, 10 to noon. And remember to come in and listen to us, the Naked Truth, the Ben McClintock, and Enoch Moore of defendingutah.org. Please check out our website, defendingutah.org, to learn more about what's really going on in Utah, and do something about it. Don't just be a hearer of the word. Be a doer. Join Defending Utah at defendingutah.org today. We'll see you next week, every Thursday, 10 to noon. The Liberty Lineup, the Naked Truth, think right and wrong, not right and left.